Hey everyone, this is the Movie Maniac. Thank you for watching, and today I wanted to do something a little different because I got a lot of good feedback on my Blu-ray horror movie collection video, which I'll share with you at the end of this one. And I thought, with everything that's going on, how about we go into something else that's not a conventional movie review and go do a deep dive, discuss things a little bit further. And I was thinking, I've had this conversation about why 80s, and you can even include early 90s nostalgia, is still so popular and why it's just continuing on. There's no end in sight. And I wanted to share that with you. And one of the things that we need to look at here is that this has already broken all the previous trend models. So if you're expecting the 80s, early 90s nostalgia to be dying off in the near future, you're going to be pretty upset, dude, because it's going to be around for a while. As a matter of fact, we'll get to this in a minute, there's an argument to be made that it's not ever going to leave. Now, here's the thing. If you were to go into a mall, keeping it in theme here, and go into any Vans, Journeys, Hot Topic, PacSun, what are you going to see? You're going to see estimated half the clothing available being 80s themed. And of course, we incorporate the early 90s because that's just an extension of the 80s anyway, right? And that means that it's not, you can't make the argument, oh, just because we're targeting millennials and Gen Xers. No, this wouldn't be as prevalent as it is, and it wouldn't survive on that alone. The thing is, go to any of the biggest synthwave channels out there. What are they? New Retro Wave and That 80s Guy? And go read the comments. I mean, how much of it, really, is people late high school, early college, maybe freshmen, going, I'm nostalgic for a time that I never grew up in. This is all I listen to now. Let's bring that back to is that how I said the 80s had already broken the traditional trend pattern and model. So you had the 80s start to the resurgence take place in the mid 2000s, really with a lot of metalcore bands channeling those metal bands, and then through that we had the electro scene really blow up in 2007, them adopting that decade, the day glow, the neon colors and things like that, a lot of imagery from films from that decade. And then you actually had the birth of that whole electro scene adopting it for years. Underneath that, you had the beginning of synth wave, and you can make the argument that synth wave is now bigger than it's ever been. So instead of taking a traditional dive after a few years and just being this trend that died out, it got propelled by YouTube and sites like that, and it's gotten even bigger. You could say it's the biggest it's ever been right now. And then you had all of those same people that were into the art still keeping it alive. So now you even have modern pop artists incorporating a little bit of synthwave. I think there's a new song from The Weeknd. If I'm not mistaken, this is a big song, and it's a synthwave song. He's just singing over it. It's happening here, 2020. So you've got all that going on, and according to the old trend models and the way this would work is that it would have come back in the mid 2000s. Maybe again it blew up in 2007. It should have been dead by 2011 or 2012. It didn't only die, it picked up steam, it got more popular. You had Hollywood giving us sequels and remakes to movies from that decade. You now have Stranger Things, which right before that show came out, maybe it was starting to see like we were hitting a plateau or it was about to dip. Maybe we were right on where the curve goes down, right? The end of the curve. However, that was just this massive shot of adrenaline. And on top of Stranger Things, you also had Ready Player One. And then Hollywood just kept putting more and more out there. If it were dying out in popularity, that would all be gone. So here's part of this too. If you're thinking of 80s nostalgia and early 90s in the sense of, oh, well, it's still going to reach a critical mass and eventually go away, you've missed it again. Because I've talked about this before. This is akin to 1950s lifestyle. What I mean by that is you probably know people who like weren't even born anywhere close to the 1950s. They might even have tattoos and all this now, but they do their hair in a 50s style. They have the 50s clothing aesthetic. They have playlists on their iPod or whatever where it has that sound. Maybe they even listen to newer artists that kind of channel that a little bit. They watch the movies, and that is now a permanent, sustained thing. There was an article, I actually showed it to my girlfriend not long ago, about a lady, and I think she's like, I don't know, somewhere between 35 and 45 years old, obviously nowhere near the 1950s in that time range, and her whole house, every bit of furniture, appliances, her wardrobe, her hair, everything is 50s bass. And that's what you're seeing, I think, happening now with the 80s. Again, this is not a trend. You're missing it if you think that that's what this is. We have this retro wave going on of people who are just fascinated with the aesthetic and the artwork. So they have artists, digital artists as well, selling their work on t-shirts, on paintings, you name it, and they're big and they make their living off of this, and their Instagram accounts and everything are huge. You have the hashtags are there, it's updated consistently, people are resharing it, putting it in their stories. It's a big deal. And then you have the horror community. This is very important. The horror community has embraced the 80s horror and aesthetic and then kept that going. So now you have conventions in many states here at Spooky Empire, and I think one out of the two every year is literally a throwback year, and it's just to whenever. And what do you see a ton of? The 80s. Because here's the thing, a lot of people in horror will tell you that it's the 70s and or the 80s that are the best decades for horror. That there's so much there. I'm still watching horror films that I haven't uncovered from the 80s. You know what I mean? And I say that in a delightful fashion. And they keep it going. So they're fueling this thing too. You also have the retro gamer vintage gaming crowd. So you know, you look at channels like what Cinemassacre was doing with the Angry Video Game Nerd in the mid 2000s when he came out. Well, I mean, they're reaching peak subscription right now. I mean, they're just getting bigger and bigger, and most of their content is from NES, 8-bit Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis. I mean, take a look at it. They incorporate other systems too, but that keeps fueling it. You want to really look into that scene. There's some people that speculate they drove the price of some of these old cartridges up. This is a real thing. You have guys like Pat the NES Punk still feeding you this with the CU podcast. You have other big channels doing this, and they're still pumping it into the foreground. VHS aesthetic. You have apps, endless number of apps and filters on a lot of video and picture sites for VHS. You see what I'm getting at here? If you are predicting this to go away or to become a thing of the past, you're wrong. Now, here's the thing. If you, the people that picked this up and tossed it back down are the same ones that like change every 2 years. I guess a lot of hipsters might be that way. No offense to those of you out there who identify with hipsterdom and are actually good people, but you know what I'm saying here. They probably dropped it when the electro scene kind of started to fade out. And to them, they probably just either went on to, I don't know, rap music, or they circled back around to indie rock. The point is, though, is that the people who did that missed out on the big picture and what was happening, while new and more people were getting in on it. You know, when you have Nintendo releasing their mini consoles from that era, and then I live in Florida, so I went to Halloween Horror Nights Orlando recently in 2019. The whole event was Synth Wave themed. I'm not kidding. It was neon lights everywhere. You could go around shazamming different musical artists. You were getting Street Cleaner, Dance with the Dead, all those other bands in that same sound were playing all throughout the park. You had houses like Ghostbusters. You had Stranger Things Season 3, which is just, again, that whole show reaches peak 80s. What else do they have back there? I'm kind of looking up at the sign. Killer Clowns from Outer Space. And everybody loved it. And you had, again, older to younger crowds spanning generations. That's another reason why you know this is still going. So it's not going away anytime soon. And if it were, you wouldn't be seeing all the resurgence constantly getting out there. Kind of running parallel, although I don't know if it's as big, but you have seen the genre new metalcore developed. Go look at bands like Motionless in White and Emmure for examples of that, which that's late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah, that could get bigger. As that rises, it's not going to push the other thing down. It's not going to be a seesaw. There was just a new leaked map for Halloween Horror Nights, which are generally pretty accurate. And again, what was it? Gremlins and Beetlejuice and all that are on there. Look at Instagram. Look at the hashtags. Look, you can, this is measurable. That's the thing. And you can put your head in the sand and deny it all you want. I don't know why you would. I mean, this is kind of a great thing. You wouldn't have companies like Shout Factory and Arrow Video prospering so much if everything I was saying didn't check out. And they're going, by the way, those companies are going to continue to do phenomenal. Even during this stay in, I don't think they're suffering that, but everybody's hurting. Don't get me wrong. But they're not going to go under. They're not going to go out because of this. I assure you of that. There's so much ground to cover here, and this really flows nicely when I had those private conversations. This does too, this conversation we're having now. But the private ones, I had somebody else to bounce things off of. They would introduce an idea, then we would leap over to the next one. We would build upon that. So I'm trying to do that with you. Obviously, it's a little bit different talking into the camera right here, just kind of by myself. But I did want to deliver this and just kind of share this with you because I don't, other than these private conversations I've had with people, I don't see this discussed openly a lot in a lot of these different communities. People share their love for it, which is great. And that's another thing too. Positivity trumps negativity, right? Like, I just believe that in the end, that's always correct. There was, this is going to sound kind of woo, but I've always said there's a higher vibrational energy going on in the 80s. And then after that, it kind of kept getting bumped down further and further. I think people were just generally overall happier. Color psychology is a real thing. It's a field that not many people know about, and the 80s actually lines up with most of what it says. Think about this. You take a prison in that experiment some of you may have read about, and they painted all the walls pink and the violence almost completely dropped off. You had that, what was that, subway out in, it was somewhere in Japan where it had the highest suicide rate in the entire country, and then they put in like blue LED neon lighting, and then it dropped by over half. Color psychology is a real thing. Look at how this works in the 80s and into the early 90s. You see what I'm saying here? So people are drawn to this. This is working even on a subconscious level. Again, these are concepts that are going to take a lot longer to explore, but I'm just trying to get a lot of this out there and get it to where I'm hopefully articulating this in a way that makes sense. I know I'm bouncing from idea to idea to idea. I've probably gone on even longer than I expected myself to go on, but I just thought this would be kind of a cool topic. I want to get your guys' feedback on this. This is all measurable. All of it. This is not just wishful thinking on my part. Because even if it were on a decline, do you think I'd abandon it? No. I've never done anything like that. I do have some late 90s, early 2000s nostalgia, a lot of it. I listened to nu metal when it was popular and then when it was extremely uncool to like it. And now it's seen a resurgence. I still like it. I've been there at the highs and the lows. It doesn't move me. The needle doesn't move whether or not this is popular or unpopular. I'm going to be into it either way. But I'm just looking at everything. I'm taking a step back. I'm taking in all the different variables. And I'm throwing out models that don't work and looking at trying to how this thing plays out and looking at all the different areas it has its tentacles in. And you begin to see it's just as popular as it had been 3 years ago. And there's no signs of it dying off. And I think that that's a great thing. At the same time, even if it were, it wouldn't matter to me. But I do think it's interesting. And those of you who are big fans, sit back, relax, because it's going to be around. It's going to be around for a while. Enjoy it. Soak it up as much as you want. And, yeah, late 90s and early 2000s nostalgia is also coming around in its own way. It's not as big. It's big, but not as big. Enjoy that, too. And thanks again for all new and returning subscribers. And you all know the drill. Smash that notification bell. Like, comment, and subscribe so you can stay inside the mind of a movie maniac.